Welcome, everyone. I realize we're at the top of our hour already, but I see people filtering in, so I think we'll give everybody just a second or two before I launch into my thoughts, so that everybody gets a chance to get in the room. Once again, welcome to this session of the open house for prospective students at the Harvard Divinity School. I'm David Holland. I'm a professor of American Religious History and grateful to be a part of your experience this morning, and grateful that you're considering Harvard Divinity School as the next step in your educational journey. I think we have about 50 minutes here together as part of this open house. And my task this morning is to discuss the intellectual life of the school. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so because the intellectual life of Harvard Divinity School has been a great blessing in my career and in my development, not only as a scholar, but I think as a citizen of the world. And I'm pleased to have the chance to chat about that with you. I'm also especially grateful to have this opportunity to connect with what might be the next incoming class of the Harvard Divinity School. Part of the great benefit of being a professor and working at an educational institution such as this is that every year we are renewed and refreshed and re-energized by another generation of young scholars who bring to our school their own set of concerns, their own set of commitments, their own vision for what this place can be and should be. And we are the annual beneficiaries of everything that you bring to this community and to these conversations. I realize that not everybody on this webinar will make the choice to come to the Divinity School. Some of you will, but all of you are benefiting the school by being a part of this open house this morning, by the questions that you'll pose and by the perspectives that you'll bring. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of how we'll proceed, I have a few remarks here at the outset. I do want to reserve about half of our session here this morning for questions and answers. So when I conclude my introductory remarks, then the Q&A option will go live and we'll have a chance to exchange some thoughts and address your particular concerns and inquiries about our school. So interesting enough, in the prior week leading up to this morning's webinar, as I've reflected on a way to capture the intellectual life of Harvard Divinity School for a set of prospective students, I quite serendipitously, that is just by chance, happened to be reading the memoir of my mentor, a person who was really instrumental in my development as a scholar and my decision to pursue graduate degrees and ultimately the life of a professor. This is a historian who has worked on religion from time to time, but is not primarily a historian of religion. Somebody whose career has taken him from Boston University to the University of Delaware to Columbia, where he finished out his career. He's now retired. And a person for whom I have the utmost respect. You'll find in your own academic and intellectual journeys that these sorts of people who have the opportunity to mentor and support and advise you, make all the difference in the world. And I'm grateful for the mentors that I've had in my life, and I'm grateful for the way in which I see my colleagues mentoring students here at Harvard Divinity School. The culture of mentoring, the culture of supporting and sustaining students, taking an interest in them and following them through the next stages of their career is very robust here. And it's one of the great blessings of being at the Harvard Divinity School is that mentorship is taken with the utmost seriousness. And you, if you choose to come here, will have a variety of both faculty and staff, other members of the community that will take a mentoring interest in your development as an individual and as a scholar. So this mentor of mine, I had no idea, even though he's been an important part of my life, I had no idea that he had any connection to the Harvard Divinity School. His degrees were all in history. His life had been focused often on political and social developments rather than religious developments. So here I am literally just about 48 hours ago reading his memoir, reflecting back on the life of somebody who had meant so much to me. And he talks about a moment of profound intellectual awakening early in his career. And I'm reading this memoir about this moment when he really kind of got a sense of why the intellectual life mattered and why his own approach to the past as a historian was shaped the way it was. And he begins to describe a moment when he's sitting on the floor of the Harvard Divinity School, actually in the library of the Harvard Divinity School, where he encountered a set of books that changed the way he thought about his own approach to understanding the world. Now, he doesn't explain in his memoir how he ended up on the floor of the Harvard Divinity School library, why it was that he happened to be here. That's all a bit vague in his narrative, but I was absolutely dumbstruck that just as I was anticipating the opportunity to speak to students about why this place matters, here I was reading the story of somebody who had mattered so much to me, for whom his intellectual awakening occurred in this very institution, surrounded by the resources that Harvard Divinity School has to offer. And it's just a sign, it's a symbol, an indication of the impact that this school can have, not only on those who are here as formally enrolled students, but on a whole variety of Harvard community members and people well beyond Harvard. So I wanted to begin with that personal account of the ripple effects that the institution has in shaping minds that then shape the world in which we exist. And my unexpected discovery this week of the place of Harvard Divinity School back in my own intellectual genealogy. And certainly now, having been here, I'm in my 8th year as a faculty member here. I've seen that story replicated many, many times over. And it may in fact be replicated in your life, should you choose to join us. Let me say a few things about the hope and the mission of the Harvard Divinity School as it relates to the intellectual life of this place. During the 20th century, when divinity schools around the country faced a moment of decision, we begin to see historically various institutions taking different tracks, different directions in how they respond to the culture and intellectual life of the modern American academy. And there are basically 3 choices that a divinity school has to choose from when figuring out what its institutional mission will be and what its identity will become. One is to focus on the vocational training that has traditionally been associated with divinity school education. That is training people for the ministry. Those who anticipate the opportunity to assume relatively recognizable roles within congregations, within chaplaincies, where training as ministerial servants of a particular community is of the utmost importance. And a divinity school has the opportunity to really focus on that vocational, ministerial training for a religious career as its core contribution. Another option that a divinity school has, and that many took, again, some decades ago, is to focus on the academic study of religion. That is the kind of religious studies approach to a field, to adopt the tools and the instruments of the modern academy and bring that to bear on this topic that we call religion, and engage in things like textual criticism, or the anthropology of religion, or the history of religion. And often that the divinity schools that have taken that track and said, no, we're primarily an academic institution. We're not so much worried about training in a vocational sense, training for ministers. We're interested in the academic study of religion, and we are functioning essentially as a religious studies department. They have essentially kind of chosen between those two. And then there's a third option, and this is an option that's been taken by fewer divinity schools, but we do see some examples of it across the country, where the primary purpose of the divinity school is to train people for social engagement, for the pursuit of social justice, for the pursuit of racial healing and the reconciliation of a society that's been torn and riven and disrupted by histories of injustice. So we have these sort of three areas of emphasis that a school could really embrace. And I won't name any of our peer institutions, all of which I have the utmost respect for. But there are schools that have chosen one of these to the exclusion of others. I do believe that the Harvard Divinity School is unique. And I realize that I'm biased, and I realize that in a sense I'm reflecting what I hope is the best of this institution. And I have no illusions about its, weaknesses or limits. All institutions have them, including this one. But I do believe, in all sincerity, that Harvard Divinity School is unique in remaining absolutely committed to keeping these three institutional missions present all the time. That it has not abandoned its commitment to a traditional role of training in a vocational sense, future ministers, future chaplains, those who conceive of an explicitly defined religious career. Nor has it abandoned in the slightest its role as an institution of academic and intellectual engagement. You may already know this, but Harvard is, as a university as a whole, is quite unique in not having a religious studies department. There is no religious studies department at Harvard. And in large measure, the Divinity School, in conjunction with other colleagues across campus, plays the role of the religious studies department at Harvard. And so a big part of what the Divinity School does is the academic study of religion. It functions in that role for Harvard generally, and in its own sense of its own purpose. So we have both an absolutely unshaken and unshakable commitment to the vocational side of this, a profound commitment to the academic and intellectual side of this, and to the close relationship between those two missions. And also a commitment to training people for social engagement in a world that desperately needs socially engaged citizens. So you'll meet, maybe in this open house, but certainly if you come here in your first year, you'll meet people who are here to be trained as ministers, whatever their tradition. We have the Buddhist Ministry Initiative, we have the Muslim Ministry Initiative, we have ministry initiatives in a variety of Christian traditions. We have students here that are working to prepare for ministry within a Jewish context. Just really rich and robust and multi-traditional vocational commitments for many of our students. We also have students, a large number of whom have absolutely no interest in pursuing a ministerial vocation, but are here to prepare for a life of scholarship, that are here at HDS to prepare themselves for a doctoral degree and see themselves as scholars in the most explicit, most focused kind of way. And then we have a lot of students that are not particularly interested in a ministerial career and not particularly interested in an academic career, but see the Harvard Divinity School as providing them with rich intellectual training for going out into the world beyond the church or the mosque or the synagogue and beyond the academy, beyond universities, into 101 different fields in which they believe it's important to be able to understand the cultures and the commitments of a diverse world. And that the study of religion at Harvard Divinity School is a uniquely powerful way to acquire that capacity for social engagement. And this is what I love about the Harvard Divinity School, is that rather than focus on one of these things to the exclusion or the minimization of the others, it is deeply committed to accomplishing all of them. And when I teach as a professor and I enter the classroom, I know every class I enter in, there will be those training for the ministry, there will be those training for a PhD, and there will be those training for a lot of other ways to engage meaningfully and beneficially the world around them. And that these students with different objectives and different commitments will have a rich and robust conversation in that classroom space, bringing their own hopes, their own aspirations, their own sense of what this education means for them to bear in their engagement with one another. And that each of those groups will benefit from their interaction with the other two. And certainly I, as the professor sitting in that classroom space, watching this rich convergence of all the things that this institution can mean to all the different kinds of people who come here. It's enormously gratifying. It's enriching. It's deepening. Sometimes it's a little bit explosive in the best possible sense of that term. Because when powerful forces mix, remarkable things can happen. And I love that about this place. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be a part of it. I'll share with you a recent statement from the Committee on Racial Justice and Healing at the Harvard Divinity School. And I happen to sit on that committee. We have a new Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, Melissa Bartholomew, who's been a wonderful addition to the HDS community. She actually was herself an HDS student who in many ways exemplifies what I've been talking about, that is a school that can serve lots of different people and brings lots of different aspirations together in one place. She had a law degree, a commitment to racial justice and social progress, and saw the Harvard Divinity School as a place to further that dream of hers. And now she's back as our Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion. Anyway, sitting on this committee with Dean Bartholomew and a number of other faculty and staff, we developed a kind of mission statement. I want to share that mission statement with you because I think in some ways it captures the point that I'm trying to make about a school that's committed to all of these different sets of ways to prepare students to make a difference in their world. The statement reads that the Harvard Divinity School Committee on Racial Justice and Healing envisions a school actively engaged in examining policies, systems, and practices, and implementing changes where necessary to ensure that the institution is in alignment with the cause of racial justice and healing. Particular attention will be paid to identifying explicit and implicit racism, white supremacy, and other systems of oppression in the classroom, curricula, and pedagogy, and to working towards their eradication. This work also requires that members of the school personally engage in the ongoing self-examination needed to unlearn and heal from internalized racism, oppression, unconscious and conscious bias. Individual, interpersonal, and institutional commitments to anti-racist and anti-oppressive work are all necessary to confront and redress racist and oppressive systems. These commitments are foundational to cultivating healthy relationships for a vibrant learning community. This will further strengthen our study of religion in service of a just world at peace across religious and cultural divides. It's a lengthy and substantive statement, but if you are paying close attention, you'll note this commitment to what's going on in the classroom in the service of the study of religion. That is, this is a place where the academic and intellectual engagement with the field of religion is paramount. That it's also preparing those who are going on to serve in other institutions, namely mosques and synagogues and churches and monasteries and other places where they'll bring these principles to bear. And that it's generally committed to preparing people to engage in this quest for justice well beyond either religious institutions or academic institutions. I'm proud of that statement. I'm proud to have been a part of the committee that constructed it, but what I offer it to you this morning as is a reflection of this capacious sense of mission that Harvard Divinity School has in its intellectual life and its determination to serve all these kinds of budding scholars. I think it's important to note that you're also coming to the Harvard Divinity School, or you would also be coming to the Harvard Divinity School and Harvard University generally, at a time when this institution is increasingly determined to connect and integrate with all aspects of the university. Harvard's a remarkable place. It is the oldest institution of higher learning in the United States. It has famously lots of resources, and there's a lot going on at Harvard all the time. You could go from lecture to lecture and symposium to symposium at this place and never sleep, never stop. There's just always something going on. But it's often been a kind of disjointed place. That is a place where, different schools, different departments, different cultures have kind of carved out their little territory, and there hasn't always been a lot of interaction among those different pieces. Well, that changed at Harvard. It began to change at Harvard about a decade ago with the appointment of a president named Drew Faust, a person, by the way, who's very interested in the study of religion and has been a good friend of the Divinity School. President Faust had a catchphrase kind of guiding her administration as the president of Harvard. And that catchphrase was one Harvard. It's one Harvard. It's not a bunch of little balkanized communities. It is one place. And that we need to work harder to connect all of its pieces. And you would now be coming to a Harvard that's been working on that for about a decade. And that even just in the time that I've been here, the 8 years that I've been here, has vastly improved in that to a point where I feel a high degree of integration. And what that means is if you come to Harvard Divinity School, you're not just coming to Harvard Divinity School, you're coming to Harvard. And you're coming to a place where you'll have the opportunity to take classes from and interact with faculty from lots of different departments, lots of different corners of our campus community. And in fact, it's worked into your curriculum to give you a chance to branch out beyond the Harvard Divinity School and to take advantage of everything that this remarkable university has to offer. Let me share with you one quotation from President Faust when she unveiled her vision of One Harvard. She said, "I have been struck, especially in recent years, by the appetite among faculty and students for opportunities to solve problems that exist in spaces between schools and departments, guided by questions not easily answered through single disciplines. They seize on issues such as energy or global health or urbanism, these issues that transcend departments and schools, and I might add, that connect the concerns of the Harvard Divinity School with lots of other sets of scholars at this place. They lead efforts that reveal the foundations of human behavior, that unlock the potential of human thought, and address new challenges posed by life in a digital age. Their explorations take them from engineering to the humanities, from medicine to public health, as they advance research in collaboration with colleagues who have complementary expertise and skills." Now, it would be disingenuous of me to suggest that Harvard is perfect at that integration. It's not. But I am suggesting that you are coming at a time when we have gotten and will continue to get much better at that. And that I've been a witness to the progress that Harvard's made to bring all of its resources to bear, especially on these issues that transcend the narrow concerns of any specific discipline. There are departments on this campus that are especially good at connecting with divinity school students. I would say, just to give you a sense of a few, the Department of African and African American Studies, the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations, the Department of the History of Science. I could name any number of others, but you will have the opportunity to connect beyond the walls of the Divinity School, and that's one of the key features of intellectual life here at HDS. I also think one of the key features of the intellectual life of the Harvard Divinity School is this commitment to high levels of intellectual rigor, combined with broad commitments to flexibility and freedom for any individual student. There are a few requirements. If you're in the MTS degree, there's one required course. If you're in the Masters of Divinity degree, there are 2 required courses plus some field ed requirements. If you include the senior thesis, I suppose there are 3 required courses. It's not very much in terms of hard and fast requirements. And this is indicative of the fact that we do want the bones, the structure of this program to be strong and to hold the high standards of a divinity school education. But we also want students to have lots of flexibility in what that looks like for their particular interests and needs, in part, to go back to my first point, because we are remaining committed to this multiplicity of missions and objectives. And not only because we value freedom for freedom's sake, but also precisely because we think that diversity is a strength. And it will enrich the rigor and the content of every individual course of study if it is in contact with those courses of study that might be different than one's own, because each student has kind of developed their own path through this place. I'll give you an example. I've already mentioned the senior thesis in the Masters of Divinity program. That senior thesis, which is something that I have the privilege of advising for some students every year, can take a number of forms. It can be a personal reflection essay. It can be a kind of hard empiricist academic engagement with a particular question. It can be done as a work of art, a matter of poetry, creative writing. It can be a reflection on ministry, on the practicalities of bringing the learning that you've acquired at the Divinity School to the particular ministerial concerns that you may have. That senior thesis can go in any number of directions, any one of which will be developed in consultation with both a thesis tutor. Well, I shouldn't say both, because there's 3 communities that you'll do this in consultation with. You'll have a thesis tutor. You'll have a set of peers, that is your colleagues, that will help you develop this thesis. And you will have a faculty advisor as a conversation partner through this. So a tutor is usually a PhD student, a community of peers, and a faculty advisor. And that in these communities, working one-on-one with some of us, working in a group setting with others of us, you will have the chance to refine and hone your ideas in this thesis in a way that will sharpen your intellectual engagement with whatever your work promises to be and whatever field you ultimately pursue. Now, for a lot of years, this was a distinctive opportunity available to our MDiv students. But in recent years, my colleague, Dan McCannon, has developed an MTS version of this. It's known as the MTS Research Seminar. And it is, in a sense, the opportunity to give MTS students the same opportunity that MDiv students have. Now, it's a little more difficult because MTS students are only here for 2 years, and MDiv students work on their thesis in their 3rd year. So it kind of collapses that calendar a little bit. But it still is this opportunity. You work closely with Dan, you work closely with a faculty mentor, and you work closely with a community of peers to develop a research interest as an MTS student. And that too can go in a variety of directions. So I offer these 2 examples. They're just 2 of many examples I could have cited to give you an example of how the structures are in place to hold you to a high standard. You'll be accountable to your peers and your tutor and your faculty mentors to achieve the highest levels of accomplishment with these theses. But also within that high degree of rigor, there is almost endless freedom to pursue this in the direction that is most meaningful to you. And we've seen some wonderful theses of both the MDiv and the MTS level produced through these processes. Let me just make one final point, and then I'll invite your questions about the intellectual life of HDS. And that is that among the most gratifying things that I have found in coming to the Harvard Divinity School as a faculty member, I've found an institution that is profoundly committed to student success. The Office of Student Life is a set of some of my favorite colleagues whose entire purpose is to help you successfully navigate this educational opportunity. I'll give you one example. It's a small example, but hopefully illustrative of what I'm talking about. So the one required course that is expected of every student at HDS is known as Theories and Methods in the Study of Religion. It's kind of notoriously challenging course, in part because it's bringing everybody together and trying to talk about religion in a way that is meaningful to all these different people who are coming with lots of different hopes and dreams and expectations about what their educational journey and ultimate career might look like. And we've got to do all this in a few weeks, and it's challenging. Well, the Office of Student Life had heard from students that one of the challenges of that course is learning how to write in a religious studies setting. It's kind of a religious studies oriented course, and it requires a certain kind of writing. And students coming from lots of different backgrounds and lots of different, undergraduate programs and fields of interest were kind of finding it difficult to figure out exactly how to master this mode of writing. So the Office of Student Life actually hired a writing fellow for Theories and Methods, which I have taught for the last 3 years, to give the students this additional resource just on their writing in just that course. So a skillful teaching fellow who focuses on writing in one course to help students succeed. And we've seen marvelous benefits from that process. The writing fellow this year is a woman named Mafaz Al-Suwaiden, and Mafaz is just an absolute gift to the students in that course. And that was spurred by an Office of Student Life that is using every resource they have to give students the tools to succeed. Office of Student Life is just one example. I could name any number of others, including the dean's office. It's a dean and an associate dean and their team that are deeply committed to student well-being and student success. So across the board, the intellectual life of this school, though it is challenging and though it does require hard work and it will stretch you for sure, it's designed for you to succeed. And I see student success overwhelmingly and in a vast variety of ways. And it's one of the things that makes this such a rewarding place to work as a faculty member. Okay, so let me pause there. I've given you kind of a general overview of the intellectual culture, intellectual life, the sense of intellectual mission of the school, and I'd love to entertain any questions that you have. I see some have pulled up in the Q&A portion here. So I'm just going to read through these and answer them in turn. We'll get through as many as we can. So I want to inquire, do I have to mention my research topic, what I want to opt for as a thesis, and details about my research question and its significance as well in the statement of purpose for the PhD program or just the area I want to work on? It's a great question. For the master's degree programs, for the MDiv and the MTS, no, you absolutely do not have to have a clearly identified research topic. That is, if that seems like a daunting obstacle in applying to HDS, please let me disabuse you of that notion. The whole purpose of a master's degree is to allow you to think broadly and capaciously about what your interests might be. And so the Divinity School, though it does encourage you to think about an area of interest to give some focus to what you do here, it is not looking for a clear research agenda at the time of application, just an area of general interest. Now, when you go on to apply for a PhD program, and it's not quite clear to me in this question if they're thinking, the person posing the question is thinking about a PhD program right now. It'd be important to note that Harvard Divinity School does not administer its own PhD program anymore. It used to. It's known as the THD degree. But now the PhD program is jointly administered by the Harvard Divinity School and what is known as the Committee on the Study of Religion at Harvard. Many faculty members, including myself, I'm the Director of Graduate Studies in the Committee on the Study of Religion, have roles in both of those worlds. And that administers the PhD program. And at that level, once you get past, a master's degree in MTS or an MDiv, then you do need to have a more narrowly focused, narrowly defined research agenda. But for your life here, for your application to HDS and to these master's programs, the answer is no. You don't need to have a rigidly, narrowly defined research agenda. A couple of you asked about that opening vignette when I talked about this mentor of mine who had this moment on the floor of the library of the Harvard Divinity School. His name's Richard Bushman. He's a historian of early America and was actually here as he got all three of his degrees. An undergrad at Harvard, he got a master's degree at Harvard and got a PhD at Harvard, but he also came back for a postdoc early in his career, and that was the moment in his development when he was sitting on the floor of the HDS library and he encountered these books that helped him kind of think through both his own culture and his own work in this really important new way. The next question, what do you look for in coming PhD students? So again, there's a question about PhD students. And do we need a master's from Harvard to be considered for the PhD, or can anyone apply? So once again, I just want to distinguish between the PhD program, which is jointly administered by the Divinity School, and the other degrees that are administered within the Divinity School. And so the answer to this specific question is, we're looking for students that have a clear sense of a research agenda at the PhD level, a clear sense of the existing work in that field, and where their contribution is going to make a difference. So if you think about these scholarly fields as conversations, the ongoing conversations, and each new book and each new article is somebody else contributing to that conversation. At the PhD level, we want students who are aware of that conversation, that understand what its most pressing questions and concerns are, and that have a sense of how they hope to contribute to it. How do you push that discussion forward? So that's what we're looking for in PhD students, and that can come in a variety of forms. The question is, do you need a master's degree from Harvard to be considered for a PhD program? No, absolutely not. We do have usually a significant number of HDS students that get into the PhD program at Harvard, but we also have a lot of students that don't have master's degrees in consideration of our PhD program. So again, I've said this, but I want to make sure I'm abundantly clear on this. You don't have to have that narrowly defined program of study for the master's level admissions. You do need to get there by the time you're applying for a PhD degree. So that's one of the key distinctions between these two things. Okay, the next question is, in addition to racism, sexism, classism, I'm reading Professor Michael Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit. Society has evolved into one that heralds individual achievement, has adopted a belief that one's success or failures based on the merit of what they have done personally. That is a kind of ignorance of the structural forces that determine the kinds of success that we tend to celebrate in this culture. And Sandel's book is very effective at exploding that myth. And the question is HDS doing anything to change that in addition to racism, sexism, et cetera? I actually think that that's been one of the long-term, well before Sandel's book, has made that concept accessible to a wider reading audience. The idea of breaking down the obsessive cultures of individual merit has long been a commitment of the Harvard Divinity School. Now, I'm not entirely sure the best way to measure that, but I certainly know from my colleagues and the administrators and staff at HDS, a recognition of the structural constraints and privilege that promotes success or difficulty, breaking down that structural inequality, and working on a sense of communitarian and collective achievement in which we each have a vested interest in the well-being and success of the people around us, rather than the hyper-individualized sense of achievement that has been such a characteristic and often damaging feature of American life. That is, in fact, something to which we're deeply committed and constantly looking for and working on ways to address. And a question like that, again, speaks to the point that I made at the outset of this discussion, which is that each new generation of students brings more life and energy to these key questions. I have no doubt that students coming in now are more attentive and more aware. That question is indicative of that awareness of this, and will bring great insight and understanding and innovation to this cultural commitment of the school. The next question is, I have been reading a lot about colleges cutting funding for PhD students and eliminating majors and entire departments. Are these cutbacks affecting Harvard Divinity School as well? We have the great benefit at the Harvard Divinity School of having a very robust endowment. Now, endowments are, affected by the market, so it's not inoculated or completely immune to the ups and downs of the financial vicissitudes of our world. But Harvard Divinity School has prioritized student financial well-being in a way, in a more robust way than any other institution I've ever been a part of. And certainly in a way that's more even than some of its other, Harvard affiliated schools and departments. Making sure that students have robust financial aid, making sure that they have the financial support to get through this, work-study programs, putting the endowment to productive use in the lives of the students. All of these things are part of the culture of this place. And so far, I know we're living in a moment of uncertainty, and I hesitate to make guarantees, when nobody knows what tomorrow might hold. But we have long been committed to protecting the financial well-being of our students, even at the expense of other things. And so that so far has been protected, and every indication is that it will continue to be protected at HDS. So the next question is, having entered politics and broadcast journalism master's background, can we still apply if we are able to transfer learned skills to applied degree? Absolutely. There's no specific educational background required for applying to the Harvard Divinity School. In fact, we have people coming from all kinds of intellectual interests, whether undergraduate or graduate level backgrounds. And again, it's part of the beauty of this community, is that people are coming with fields like politics and broadcast journalism, and bringing that skill set and those ideas to bear in their conversations with their peers in the study of religion. And so that's absolutely, nothing is off the table. There's no intellectual background that would preclude you from joining in with the community at HDS. There's a question about my own faith background and how it informs my pursuits in academia. I'm a practicing Latter-day Saint, and certainly I think we're all the product of our commitments beyond the academy and how they inform our pursuits. Like people from many other faith traditions, I'm committed to principles of truth. I'm committed to the pursuit of justice and equality. I'm committed to the value of every human life. And these things are absolutely intertwined with my own academic pursuits. What you'll find here, though, is not every faculty member has a faith commitment or a faith tradition. It's not a requirement either for students or for faculty that they have a faith background and commitment. I happen to, and a number of us do, but many don't. And so there are lots of people here that are studying religion not from a sense of personal engagement or devotional practice, but because they recognize that religion is a powerful force in the world, and it's beneficial to understand how it works, how it functions, and the effects that it has. The next question is, I hope to become a religious historian, but was attracted to pursuing an MTS degree before pursuing a history PhD because of the more explicit social and ethical engagement of HDS. Could you speak a bit to the possible benefits or drawbacks of some graduate work in theology versus graduate work only in history? It's a great question. If you are going on to do religious history, I think a degree from HDS is almost universally a positive. You asked about drawbacks. It's difficult for me to see any drawbacks to that approach. It's increasingly unlikely for PhD students to be admitted. Certainly this is true at Harvard, but I think it's true at other places as well, for PhD students to be admitted without a master's degree. There was an era when that was more common. It's becoming less so. There are still exceptions, so I don't want to speak too universally here. There are still people that get into PhD programs straight out of their undergraduate, but fewer and fewer of those. And a master's degree as a launching pad into a PhD program is increasingly common as part of this. So bear that in mind in answer to this question. If you were applying to a PhD program in history in certain subfields, say you were going to be an economic historian, for example, I think there are still places where there's a bit of a prejudice against the study of religion, and a degree from HDS might not serve you well in being admitted in that field. But if you are going to study religious history, then I think it's almost always a benefit. And we certainly have a track record of getting students into history programs. I just had one of my advisees just start this fall PhD program in history at Berkeley, doing religious history. And lots of times religious history is done within religious studies departments too. And in that case, there's absolutely no question that a degree from HDS would be of benefit. So again, if you're really committed to the religious history angle, I think it is a boost. You get good training here, you get good letters of recommendation, you get all of the kind of support to get into a top flight history program for the pursuit of religious history. If you think you might study other areas of history, or you think you're not sure that it's religious history that you're interested in, you might want to do political or economic or social history, then you might think twice about a degree at HDS versus a master's degree in a straight history program. But that kind of depends on how clear you are and what you want your next steps to be. Tell us more about religion in public life. Again, I was on the committee for the development of that. It's something that I'm very, very fascinated about. I see that I think Susie has provided, or Sarah's provided some answer to that. So I won't belabor that point. But I will just say that this is a recognition again of the fact that HDS is committed to empowering people to use a knowledge of the study of religion to enrich and benefit lots of different areas of life. And so this is going to bring in professionals who are leaders in their field in business and law and the arts, and bring them to a place like HDS where they can find ways that religion and a knowledge of religion and literacy in religion will actually improve every area of human engagement. It's just starting this year, so it's brand new. And there's a website that I think you've been referred to that can fill you in on the details on that. But it is an exciting moment in the life of our school, and I think symbolic of these larger institutional and intellectual commitments. How does HDS filter the true words of Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, the Buddha from thousands of years of human fabricated fake news? That's a big question, and probably beyond the 2 or 3 minutes we have left here, except to say that is in many ways one of the primary purposes of various aspects of this field. Source criticism, say in Quranic studies or in biblical studies, is committed to the idea of figuring out the sources of these texts and understanding their histories of transmission and the cultural and material realities through which texts pass as they pass through millennia. And so there's no way I can answer that question here in 60 seconds, but there are lots of courses and lots of scholars here that are committed to the practice of understanding where these words come from, how they get transmitted, and how we should engage them in our contemporary moment. Does HDS have different tracks that are not affiliated to specific religions? Absolutely. Religious tradition is one way to come at your study at HDS, but it's far from the only way. So we have fields of study like women, gender, and sexuality, which doesn't have any commitment to the study of a particular tradition. It's the study of women, gender, and sexuality as it relates to religion generally. Religion and society, right? What are the social practices associated with the state of religion? Again, not about tradition. Religion and literary studies, religion and literature. Another way in which, the study of religion here does not require, an identification with or even the specific study of a particular tradition. So that I again, like the question of, do you need a particular intellectual background and do you need a specific research agenda? So too the question of, do you need a particular religious tradition, either as an object of study or as a kind of personal identification? No, you don't. Could you talk about, there's the next question, could you talk about academic integrity at HDS? Absolutely committed to principles of intellectual honesty and academic integrity. We uphold the highest standards in resisting plagiarism, in demonstrating appreciation for the intellectual property of others, for ensuring that anything that we write or speak is done with the highest standards of academic integrity in mind. I'm getting word from our organizers that we need to wrap up in order to get you to the next session. So let me just say, how grateful I am to have this hour with you, how excited I am that you're thinking about HDS, how hopeful I am that that this is a productive open house for you, and I look forward to talking with any of you individually if you'd like to continue the conversation directly. Thanks so much. Good luck.